At best, I've got the concept of a plan. Why do we have to walk in the dark holding these teeny tiny lamps? I'm scared. It just feels so risky. If this shit doesn't work out, I'm gonna front like nothing ever happened. I'm not dressed. I'm barely awake. No, I'm awake. I've been awake, but I haven't been like lucid, I guess. I don't know. But like, starting is really freaking hard. Like, I don't have I've got yesterday's makeup on. Like, I've not done my hair. Like, I'm willing myself to start. I'm on the couch, or I was on the couch, willing myself, like, Brandy, you can do this. You can do this. It is not harder for you than anybody else, and they can do it, so you can do it. I'm sitting here literally trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do with my life. What is it that I should do? What could I be great at? I pray and I hope to God that I look back at this and I laugh at myself. A, for literally having the audacity to be on the internet with no makeup, or yesterday's makeup. And B, because it means that you did it and you figured it out. And not even so much, because it's like the worst kept secret. It's not even a secret, girl. You can do this. Brandy, you've got this. You can do this. You can do this. I love you so much, Brandy. You can do this. Hey, you guys. Welcome back to Forties Unfiltered, where I, Brandy Lynn, process my midlife crisis out loud in real time, because therapy is only an hour, and that is simply not enough. Yeah, what you just heard was me, raw and uncut. And now we're back in my dressing room, and I'm still here, still figuring things out. I actually recorded that back on the 4th of July. I had just spent weeks plus the whole night before working on the prototype of a business idea, and the reality of actually having to execute it was really hitting me hard. And even though I had technically started, obviously, I was still so early in the process that it felt like I hadn't really done much of anything at all. So I was really doubting myself. And because a prototype and a cash flowing business are light years apart, um, I just began, looking around my house, and I start pacing and talking to myself and trying to reason with myself, and ultimately start to beg myself not to give up. If you've been rocking with me since the first episode, then at this point, you've heard me mention quite a few times that I blew up my life. And for all intents and purposes, this episode probably should have been first so that you could get a full understanding of how I got here. But it was really, really important to me as we're building this relationship that you got a chance to get to know me a little bit and see my personality, so you can decide for yourself, like, if this is a vibe and if we're going to click, So at this point, I think we can all agree that I'm an acquired taste, and you're either leaning all the way in or you are tapping all the way out. So I wanted to lay some groundwork. And in episode 1, I shared with you how I'm feeling a little lonely and isolated because I'm not where society says I should be at 41 years old. And, at middle-aged, I don't have a community of people who get me, and then in episode 2, I unpacked a little bit more about the patterns and the baggage that have kept me stuck for so long, and how fear and people pleasing have kept me from expanding to my full potential, whatever the hell that is. And now we are at episode 3, where I'm finally going to tell you exactly what led up to me throwing a torpedo into my life. But first, before we get into that, we need a drink. This week's drink didn't actually have a name until I gave it one. I got it from a girl that I follow on Instagram. She had girl bossed just a little too hard and leveled up all the way to this fancy high rise in Miami. And then one day she just decided that The amount of work that it took to maintain the new lifestyle was not worth it. So she packed up her family and moved back home to her other absolutely stunning condo. And now she gets to spend her evenings out by the pool with her husband and her little girl, eating hors d'oeuvres and sipping this little summertime cocktail that I'm calling Girl Boss Interrupted. Um, it's a really simple drink. It's just like Casamigos, coconut water, lime, and a salt rim. And it's actually pretty refreshing. Now, she does specify that it should only be enjoyed in a crystal glass or else it just won't taste the same. And that's how you know she's clearly my kind of girl. So, mm-hmm. Mm. And you've got to use the pressed coconut water or else it won't taste the same. Mm. It's really good. You can find today's drink recipe. Mm. Yum. Over on my website, fortiesunfiltered.com. And while you're there, maybe click on the link to this video version of this podcast on YouTube. And then if you do, you'll get to see the live version of that opening clip that you heard. But as you know, my favorite part of the site is where you can interact with me. So please tell me your own unhinged story or vent about something happening in your life or just say hi. Like, I really don't care. I just want to talk to you. You can even leave me a voice note, and who knows, I might end up here on the next episode. Maybe the sea salt just melts in your mouth. All right. So, you know, the Harry Potter movies, in those movies, we start with the Sorcerer's Stone. And it's all whimsical and full of wonder. Then we move to the Chamber of Secrets, where it's still magical and wide-eyed. But then we hit Prisoner of Azkaban, and suddenly it's a total 180 from child's play to full-on young adult novel. So yeah, that's where where we're about to go. So brace yourselves because we're about to take a hard left. Obviously not every episode is going to be this heavy, but I do think it's important for me to make clear that my opening line is not just for shits and giggles. Like, I really am. I don't know. I don't know why I'm laughing. I really am in a full blown midlife crisis. Like, just minus the Camaro. Oh God, I'm putting this on the internet. All right. Right out of high school, I started dating this guy, and long story short, at some point, I ended up raising both of his children alone by myself. Like, no help from him, no help from anyone else. But because of that, I developed a really special bond with his daughter. Eventually, as time went on, she and her brother went back and lived with their family. But after she graduated high school, she reached back out to me and actually came to live with me for a little bit. She actually even worked for me at my company, and it was so fun to see the woman that she'd grown into or that she was becoming. And so we had this little routine going, and we're talking about her going to college, and we were building a sense of family. And I was in a long-term relationship at the time as well, and even he thought she was great. Like, it just all fit and everything felt really hopeful. And then one day I came home and she had just packed up and left. No warning. And it stung. Like, I was not expecting it at all. But, you do what you got to do and you move on. And so years go by before we reconnect again. And she reaches out to me and tells me that she's in a tough situation. And, we start slowly rebuilding our relationship. And then in the middle of that, my dad passes away on Christmas morning, early Christmas morning. And it was such a complicated season trying to hold on to this daughter figure that I loved while like grieving sort of the loss of my dad. Like, not long after I found out she was pregnant, and, I did what I always do. I was like, yes, I had her move in with me. And in my mind, I thought, this is it. We can make our own little family. I'll help her raise this baby and we'll do it together. And, I rearranged my life, honestly, to make space for her and the baby. And this was like right in the middle, like towards the end, but the middle of the pandemic, and resources were really tight. But, I bought furniture, I planned finances, I did all the things you do when you're like preparing for a newborn. Um, and when the baby came, I was there. Like, I was there. I was like in the delivery room. Like, I cut the umbilical cord. I was the first person to see him. I prayed over him. Like, it was crazy exciting. And if you've ever seen a newborn being born, um, being delivered, just know, like, it's super gross, but it's also like really amazing. And it's beautiful in like that like crime scene you can't look away from kind of way. And I never told her this, but I actually stepped in a huge puddle of blood and I seriously almost busted my ass around everybody. Like it was so bad. Like and then when I realized what I stepped in, I honestly almost puked. It was so gross. Like it was really bad, but the baby was cute. So, mm. Anyway, so that euphoria was short lived because basically a couple of days later we have like this epic falling out and she wanted to take the baby out in public and he was literally only 48 hours old and in the middle of a worldwide pandemic, and I was like, absolutely the fuck no. Like, I get it, and I had already pledged, and not that she needed me to say this because it's kind of how I am. I would never tell you like what to do or how to raise your child, but like, fuck no, like this is not happening. And I was firm about that. I asked her to like respect it. And, not just for me, but for the baby's health and safety. And I even offered, like, if you just need to get out, I'll watch the baby yourself. And, I'm not exactly proud of how I handled the situation. Like, it got kind of ugly, but like, instead of working through it, she packed up and left. And this time she took the baby with her. So as fast as my little family came, they went. And I think part of why it really cut so deep is because, like I talked about back in episode 2, I never really had that support growing up. Nobody ever really looked out for me or protected me. And so, of course, I grew up wanting a family of my own and something that finally, I'd have like reciprocal love. And here it was right in front of me. And I really let myself believe that it was happening, so that made losing them feel even heavier. I just throw myself into my career. And for a minute, it felt like I'd finally like hit pay dirt, like landed this kind of shot I've been waiting for, because the VP of like a huge company came to me with an opportunity that felt like massive. Like it was super high profile, high stakes role. Like I could have retired there. The only catch was that I had to take a step back in position temporarily so that they could move the other person up to the corporate level. And then there would be a smooth transition without freaking out, the stakeholders. And so I was like, this is it. Like, oh my God, I've made it. And, maybe part of why I chased it so hard was because when I was younger, I overheard my mom on the phone with telling my stepdad that I would never build anything or be an entrepreneur, that I'd only ever be a worker and I'd punch a clock my whole life because I didn't have it in me, which tells you something about her expectations, because at the time she was saying this, I hadn't punched a clock in like a decade. Like, I was well past middle management. Like, so when these big opportunities dangled in front of me, like I grabbed them with both hands. I wanted the title, the paycheck, and like like the proof that she was wrong, the proof that I was not just destined to be a worker bee. And honestly, it felt like the smart play, short-term patience for long-term payoff, but not just career security, but like the kind of move that comes with like fuck you money. You know what I mean? Like fuck you money that buys freedom, like the freedom to travel and chase more experiences and, the freedom to distract myself from the things that I didn't want to deal with. So, but almost immediately it unraveled. And then I caught wind that the company was about to lose their contract. And then sure enough, the VP who'd brought me in, all those, made me all those promises, he like ends up leaving the company, and overnight, like everything vanishes. Like nobody seems to remember any of the promises that were made to me. And it was just like all the other things that I'd held on to in the past just disappear like that. So, I see the writing on the wall and I start looking for other opportunities, and I end up meeting with a smaller ownership group. but it was the same song, different verse. Like, they promised me the world, come aboard, get the project up and going, and once it's running, we'll move you to the downtown to the major market, and it's a bigger role, bigger platform, and it was a super cool brand. It really, really was. So I grind through the process again. I get their business up and running. Like, I build like a phenomenal team to this day, the best team I've ever led in my entire life. And then 1 week before, 10 days before opening, actually, they sit me down and they say, yeah, we sold it. So you're out, but hey, maybe we can work together again down the line. So luckily, the new company that inherited me was pretty solid, but by then, like, I was fucking over it. Like, I was so jaded. I was burned out. The fact that it was a bigger company, actually, it came with some assurances that the smaller company didn't have, or some security, I guess. But like, it just like it just made me feel like another spoke in the wheel, like, and 3 years of working there and 7 awards later, it didn't matter how shiny it looked on paper, because, like, I hated the industry. I hated managing people. Like, I hated pouring myself into these massive projects only to end up drowning in the same, like, mundane, soul-sucking grind and empty promises. So, like, uh, then out of nowhere, in the midst of that, I get a call from one of the neighbors back at my dad's old neighborhood, telling me that my stepmom had been seen wandering around and, like, totally out of sorts. So I hop on the first thing smoking and I go to Texas, and I eventually realize, or come to find out, that she's been diagnosed with dementia. So, I will say this: about a year or so after my dad died, you know, she'd been saying some strange stuff, but they were so close that I honestly just thought it was grief, because grief doesn't always happen immediately. Sometimes it takes time. And it just, nothing that ever saw her do, like, rose to the level of being overly concerned, because she was still living on her own and she seemed fine. But you know over time, she stopped returning my calls, she stopped texting me, and that was very unlike her. But as our communication waned, you know, because of my insecurities, I assumed, like, oh, well, I guess she just doesn't love me anymore. Like, I guess that's it. Um, but standing there faced with the reality of what was really going on, I finally understood what was happening. And I cannot even explain the guilt that hit me. Like, I felt so bad for not having been there, or not really, like, being proactively checking up on her. But then, let's be real, at the same time, for anybody that's ever dealt with this, like, specifically with my stepmom, oh honey, you don't pop up on her. You do not pop up on her. So, I had reason to there were reasons that I didn't just, like, jump in and, like, pop up at the house a whole time zone away, but it didn't really do much to quelch how I felt. Like, I really felt shitty about that. So, very quickly, very quickly, after talking with, doctors and neighbors, the police department, everybody that had been involved in trying to help her over the past year, it became super clear that I was the best person to step in as her guardian, and that wasn't something that I really sought out, but it was one of the, it was the most responsible option at the time. And of course, my decision stirred up some tension with my stepsister, who was her biological daughter. Um, she definitely was not happy about it. But, it was a necessary situation. And so suddenly I was in the middle of, like, legal battles and paying attorneys, which are crazy expensive, and booking flights back and forth from, Atlanta to Austin, which, why the fuck are those flights so expensive? Like, what's popping off in Austin that, like, you're, going from Austin to Atlanta? Like, it's crazy. You can go to Dallas for half the price. Anyway, which I did a couple of times because it was so expensive. Like, I would fly into Dallas and I would just drive in a rental car, and that was cheaper than flying directly to Austin. But anyway, I basically became a human ATM, you know, and I never stopped to process what was really happening. Because one thing they don't tell you when you're about hitting your 40s is that suddenly you're everybody's fucking emergency contact. Like, who's the manager of death, dementia, and disappointment? plot twist, it's you, bitch. Like, mm. So at this point, I'm already run down. And then out of the clear blue sky, this whirlwind romance shows up. And, within just like a few weeks, he proposed. And listen, we're both middle aged. So I was thinking, cool, like we're at the age where we should both know what we want. Also, everybody in my family that's been married for long periods of time all got married quickly. And so we actually had a joke. We used to call my mom Elizabeth Taylor. Other marriages lasted longer, but my mom had been married like 3 times. And so, but she would listen, she'd lock those motherfuckers down, honey. She'd be married like in a year and a half, like flat. And they were all like well-to-do guys. It was crazy. She probably had platinum lined, you know what? Anyway, uh, but he seemed really great. And I really believed, here we go again, that I'd met somebody that I could build a family with, and he actually pulled what I thought was a straight baller move. Like I've date well-to-do men before, but he added his debit card to my Apple Pay because so that I could always be taken care of in case like there was an emergency and he's like stuck in a board meeting or something. So I'm thinking, oh, this is dope. This is what serious men do. Like, this is awesome. I could get down with this. He's the real deal. And at first, originally, because of his job, the plan was for me to move to Austin. So I start selling off my furniture. And then we pivoted because he ultimately wanted to be here. So we decided, okay, cool. Then I'll keep working at my job. So it should be fine. So I start making space for him in my home, and we bought my wedding dress together. He was handling like the location and the details about that because it was just going to be a beach wedding, just like the two of us, like no debt, just us. And the honeymoon wasn't even going to be traditional. Like we were going to do like a tropical thing like next year, but at like the following year. But we had this whole like fall winter travel through Europe schedule mapped out. Like it was ideal. But I told my family, I told my coworkers, and we actually even started planning my transition at work. And one day I'll get into the details of all that, how that whole thing really went down. But suffice it to say, that motherfucker 2 weeks before our wedding day calls me and says, "You're perfect, and I don't think I'm good for you. You're better off without me." And that was it. It was damn near like a Sex in the City, like post-it note moment. No fight, no explanation, just gone. And then about 6 weeks later, I get a call from the hospital in Texas that my stepmom had suffered a stroke. And she had to be resuscitated, and it was really bad. So again, I jump on a flight. And when I get there, my stepsister wouldn't let me in the hospital room because you could only have 2 people in the room at a time. And she wouldn't allow me, although she'd been there since late the evening before, she wouldn't allow me in. And even though I had legal authority to override her, I didn't have the heart to force the issue. So I just never saw my stepmom again. That was it. And so I told the doctor, I was like, listen, don't bullshit me. Give it to me straight. I can handle it. And she did. She said, your stepmom's only alive because of the machines. And without them, she'll be gone in a few hours. And, they were advising me to take her off the machines so that she could pass naturally. Now, to be totally honest, I knew my stepmom was gone when the doctor first called me back at home, so I already knew what I needed to do before I ever got on the plane. But as crazy as it sounds, I really, really wanted my stepsister to be part of that decision because I didn't want her to feel like anyone was taking her mom away from her, just because I had the authority to do so. Because actually my mom had died of cancer and she was resuscitated and on life support, and we had to make the decision about that. So I understood the weightiness of what I was doing, because at that stage, and I hope that you hear my heart for those of you that are dealing with this, at that stage, they're already gone. It's really about managing the emotions of the people that are in the shock of having to deal with the reality of the best thing for them is to let them go. And also, I didn't want to be alone in that moment. Like I didn't want to be by myself. But she refused to talk to me. And, that silence on top of everything else was just like crushing for me. But, so I let the doctor know, and told her it was okay to take her off the machines, and while she and her side of the family leaned in, um, on with each other, and experienced my stepmom's passing together, I just walked back to my rental car all by myself alone and drove back to my ex-fiance's house. Like, can you imagine? Hey guys, Brandy from the future jumping in here really quickly. I realized I didn't explain this very well. So, yeah, my ex and I had been broken up, and up to that point, we had been completely no contact. But when I got the call about my stepmom, I was panicked, broke, and freaking out. So I shot him a text asking if I could crash on his couch because it was the cheapest, fastest way to get to Texas before meeting with the hospital and coming up with a game plan. Okay, now back to the pod. So a few hours later, I get a call that she passed. And by that time, my ex has come home and, did the obligatory, like, oh, I'm so sorry for your loss. And I'm like, yeah, all right, cool. And I'm not saying much. I'm just kind of going through the motions of, like being just numb, really. And shortly after the food arrived, an angry woman came to the door. And that's when I found out he'd been cheating on me the whole time. So that's fun. But honestly, you'd be so proud of me because I barely even got mad. Like again, I was just like numb, you know, between being shut out of my stepmom's final moments, you know, she was my literal last parent. I had no more parents at this point. I'm an orphan at like 40. And my stepsister was refusing to speak to me. Now I've got this woman at the door. Like I was just done. So I left, like just nicely, got up, got my little bag, and I left him and his little secret girlfriend to deal with their situation. And, I actually slept in my rental car at the gas station outside the airport. And I literally caught like a 5 a.m. like a 5:05 a.m. flight back to Georgia. So I get home and back to life as usual. And at this point, I'm thinking I'm handling everything fine because as you can see, I am no wallflower, right? Normally when I'm pissed off about something, you and everybody within a 5 mile radius is going to know about it. But I'm thinking that I'm handling everything really well because, I'm not having any big emotions. And so, like super quickly, I'm like tapped on the shoulder for a new project for work. And it's like shiny and exciting and again, distracting. And I thought maybe, this was God like pushing me forward, like, so I remember getting the offer letter and I told one of my coworkers, I told them, I was like, oh my God, I want to call my ex and thank him so much for not marrying me because this is so much better. Like literally, he was like very like, traditional male kind of guy, which is fine or whatever. But like my offer letter was more money than he's ever seen. And I was like, this is fucking amazing. Mm. But from the very beginning, when I get there, the project was a failure. Like it was a total failure. My company had been brought in at the ninth hour, after the last company had basically just been kicked out. And it was total insanity. Like there were all kinds of problems, like chief among them, like a lack of trust with the stakeholder and between the stakeholders. And there was like no support for those of us that were in the field, and like contracts weren't being honored, and, monies weren't being paid. And it just was horrific. And ultimately I just ended up going back to my old position. So if I had to pinpoint it, that was the moment. I get a call from my boss at 10 o'clock at night telling me, like, go home for the weekend, which is basically, corporate speak for like, yo, we're out of here. Um, and that was the moment that I was just like, I can't do it anymore. Like, six figures was like the pinnacle. Was like, that was always my goal, and it didn't like, I worked so hard, but like it didn't matter. Like I was so checked out, like almost as soon as I got back, I gave my resignation, which for somebody like me is like total insanity because I'm you know, I'm I'm very, very attached and nervous to like having a way to take care of myself. And but the anxiety was just like at an all-time high. And like I knew it was really serious because I didn't have like a big emotional outburst. I just kind of felt like nothing. And I felt like I was getting smaller and smaller, and it constantly felt harder to breathe. Like, there's like having an anxiety attack, which is like, you know, there's a manic part to that and all that. Like, it was almost like the opposite. It seemed like I was having an anxiety attack, but instead of like feeling your lungs constricting, I felt like my lungs were getting smaller and smaller. Like, I don't even know how to make that make sense. I just I couldn't do, I just became so withdrawn. I did not care. Like, I had to go. I had to go. This is how stressed I was. We're almost done with this drink. Obviously, like, I didn't blow up my life because, like, I had a vision board and a 5-year plan. No, like, that would have been way too cute. Like, I got to be dramatic, right? I clung to that job with white knuckles until it practically, dragged me out the door, kicking and screaming quietly. But, staying wasn't living for me. Like, it felt like I was shrinking and like I was dying a slow death, honestly. And, now I don't have the luxury of playing it safe. My only option is to figure out how to build a life that fits me, or at least go down swinging, because, I don't see any other way forward. But like, seriously, if you if you if you catch me at a drive-through someplace, you'll know how this all worked out. Oh, she was right. It is the salt. She made a point to say like the sea salt rim is a big deal. The Himalayan, mine's the pink sea salt. It totally is. Um, so anyway, yeah, I walked away. I walked away. And but quitting obviously did not mean I had clarity. If anything, it left me staring straight at the mess that I'd been avoiding after I got some sleep. And this podcast, like this whole pivot that I'm doing, it's like the biggest faith move I've ever made. I'm literally processing my midlife crisis out loud with you in real time, literally. I'm hoping that I can figure this all out and maybe, help other people along the way. I am not exaggerating when I say I do not have a plan. Like, at best, I've got the concept of a plan. But lately I've been thinking about that Bible verse where he says, the Lord is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. And honestly, it keeps playing in my head, but like sometimes I get frustrated and I'm just like, Dad, why we can't just ride at dawn? Like I mean, seriously, like, why do we have to walk in the dark holding these teeny tiny lamps? Because like, I'm scared, like, I know I'm supposed to like keep my eyes on you and all of that, but it's dark out here. And like, I can't even see my hand in front of my face, let alone you. Like, can't you see I'm freaking out? Like, I'm squeezing your hand and I'm still terrified. Like, I just, like, so I've got that going on in my head. But then, like, you want to hear something funny? So, like, back when I was on that project before I left, the one that I was just telling you about, I was talking to this colleague, and she stopped me and she goes, "You can do hard things." And at the time, I just thought, oh, she's being sweet, and I just kind of brushed it off. But lately, even that's been like echoing back in my head. And like, I even shot her a random text and I was like, telling her how it stuck with me and it's like really motivating me right now. And she's like, oh, that's awesome. So like, are you going to tell me what you're working on now? And I was like, hell no. Because if this shit doesn't work out, I'm going to front like nothing ever happened and just like go get another like corporate gig, girl. Hmm. So, but when it comes to change, maybe that's the point. You know, you only ever get enough light for like the very next step. And for me right now, that step looks like tripping over boxes and half finished projects in a house that could pass for an episode of Hoarders. And yeah, a lot of that is, you know, me being into DIY and decor and everything and all my little side projects. But the truth is, I my house has never really recovered since I sold all my furniture. Like, it's just another example of me not dealing with things. And so what you see in that video clip isn't just clutter. It's like the aftermath of a life that like I totally dismantled but never rebuilt. You know, so another reason though I think that uh video is interesting to watch back is because it clearly shows a passion that I've never fully allowed myself to explore. But here's the tension, right? So at this stage of my life, creating security feels like way more important than anything else. And what might have felt acceptable like in my 20s or 30s now feels straight up irresponsible. To walk away from like a practical job, or career that's stable, just jumping into something more creative without any assurances or safety nets, like it just feels so risky, and it feels like I might lose time that I'll never recover. But then again, there have been so many times where I've watched people being interviewed, and a very common question that I hear is if the interview is about the person's journey, it's like, wow, look what you've done. This is so amazing. Like, what would this version of you go back and tell your younger self? And I'm not even kidding. For some reason, I've actually thought about this question before. I have no idea why, but I have thought about that, how I'd answer it. And, I've come to the determination that if I had to go back and talk to little Brandy, I'd start by saying, I'm so sorry that I let you down. You know, even when, I started to see all the ways that you were neglected, I still didn't love you the way you needed. Um, I gave away your time and your heart to people that didn't stay. And I kept pushing you harder into places that made you feel really small and unsafe. And I should have told you that you were good enough and I should have protected you. And I should have cheered for you when you wanted to try something new instead of making you feel so afraid all the time. And I never showed you how brave you really are. But, I see it now and I'm going to do better for the both of us. Um, and while it really sucks to say that out loud, especially to the World Wide Web, um, if you know anything about kids, they're nothing if not forgiving and loving. And, that's actually what gives me hope for this next chapter. If I can't do it for me, at least I can do it for her. Ooh, you guys are so my people. And I am Brandy Lynn, and this has been my 40s Unfiltered.